Welcome to the podcast. This is Caleb Owens with the Insurance Experience, Mark Deddens with iStorm Group, and Adam Posan with Posan and Company.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caleb.
Okay, excellent. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and experience in the field, Mark?
So I'm an entrepreneur by trade. I started a company in 2011 called the iStorm Group, and our primary mission is to protect multifamily property owners from impending and certain catastrophic storm damage. Our motto is not if but when. So we have a risk management program that helps owners protect their assets pre-loss. We're in 35 states across the U.S. We've got about just under 2,000 properties that we currently protect for our owners. And we just eclipsed the $120 million claim settlement and project execution milestone in our 12th year.
Wow, that's very impressive. So, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Started as a general contractor and had an opportunity to do some restoration work for the carrier and found that they don't always pay what you've got to have in order to complete a project appropriately. And I always figured there's probably a way to, say combat that, or a way to counter the carrier. And through some research years ago, found out about public adjusting and the legalities behind the proper way to negotiate an insurance claim, and went down the path of public adjusting, appraisal, and doing umpire and expert work, and kind of ran with it. And here we are 15 years or so later, and it's what I'm doing.
Wow, that's very impressive. Can you explain, Adam, about what a public adjuster does and how they differ from insurance company adjusters?
First and foremost, an insurance company adjuster there to adjust on behalf of the carrier. It's like having an attorney. If you go to suit against somebody, the person you're going to suit against has an attorney. You want your own attorney. You wouldn't want to use that other person's attorney. And I would explain it in that manner. So a public adjuster is your adjuster. It's the policyholder's adjuster or representative through the claims process. Where the carrier has theirs, you have yours. And that involves licensing through different states, different requirements that are needed state to state. And so it gives the policyholder a way to check and balance the insurance company and make sure that what the insurance company is presenting is accurate.
Got it. Okay. So can you walk us through that process? With all that being said, walk us through that process with a public adjuster on a property damage claim.
Sure. The first thing you'd want to do is inspect a property, and you'd want to start from the ground and work your way to the top. Just because you've got an insurance claim where they say it's maybe an HVAC unit is damaged, regardless, an event happened to that property. And you don't want to focus on the main thing that the carrier is telling you to focus on. You want to look at the project as a whole. And so what caused the damage to the HVAC unit? Was it hail, or was there strong winds, or what was it? And what else could it have affected? And so our job is to go in and look at the project as a whole, from the ground to the top of the roof, to see what other attributable damages may have occurred from that date of loss.
Wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because there's so many other things that can come up and affect you. It's not just that one HVAC unit. It could be electrical systems throughout the entire property.
It could. And once you figure out what damages have occurred based on that potential date of loss, it's a matter of document through appropriate photos and appropriate experts getting involved to prove damages. And then you can bind all that into a solid estimate, and you're able then to present that to the carrier for some sort of negotiation. But I would say the most important thing a public adjuster can do is document appropriately and accurately using the best experts they can get.
Wow. Got it. Okay. So in your experience, what are some common mistakes that policyholders make when they're filing a claim on their own?
Not understanding their policy, not knowing what they're owed. Policy, and Mark will go over this, I'm sure. Policy is a contract, and that contract inside that policy states exactly what you're owed for, and how. And if you don't understand those intricacies, more times than not, they're going to cut some corners, and you're going to end up with less than what you should have gotten. And it's not about sticking it to the carrier. It's about holding them accountable and holding them to the policy that they provided you. So I would say understanding your policy is probably the number one mistake that is.
I'm going to jump in, Caleb. And
go ahead. Please.
So I agree with Adam not understanding the language that is in the contract. And unfortunately, what happens is property owners don't take the time to get some sort of third party, impartial, someone who represents me, the owner, to review this policy. So what happens is a claim could be filed for a legitimate loss, and then all of a sudden there's a surprise. And the only surprise I like is when the IRS sends me a check. That hasn't happened in a while.
I
The
like
rest
that.
of them are normally shitty. Okay, it's not.
Yeah.
And so I've seen things where people have co-insurance that's inadequate, and they get $1 million loss, and they get $300,000 co-deductible, and they don't know that. That's a bitter
Right.
pill to swallow when you have a loss. The other thing is they might have some hail or wind exclusion that prevents them from obtaining law and ordinance coverage or code upgrades, and so I'm going to segue into the biggest mistake. The other biggest mistake, right in there, is not having a public adjuster, because these guys understand the language. They can speak the language. They can review the policy. They can come back to you and say, hey, you don't have adequate coverage, or do you realize, right, that you have co-insurance? And if you had a catastrophic loss, you might be out of pocket. So I didn't know that. Now you have options, right? So my whole thing is be prepared. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Every battle's won before it's begun. So be prepared. How do I prepare myself? If you want to read your policy, as the average dude or property owner out there, that's not going to help you, because you're not going to be able to interpret all the intricacies in the policy. And that's by design, by the way. It's important. It's purposefully confusing.
Right.
True story.
That's the best way I can say it. So you have to have an expert unwind that. And the best time to do that is when you engage in a relationship. And that kind of comes down to what we do. So I think the biggest mistake is kind of twofold. Who's going to review your policy? Your broker, your agent. They're the ones who wrote it. Okay. And I've never had a broker come up and say, hey, just want to make you aware there's some loopholes in here. They don't do that. And as soon as you sign your policy, the insurance company accepts the premium, they're bound to the terms.
That's right.
Like Adam or one of his team members. He's got 30, 40 something PAs across the US that help cover our assets. And every time we go to loss, he handles it, because I know the policy review is going to be correct. The other couple of problems you run into with this claims filing it themselves. You can have the PA file it. Data loss is a big issue. Okay. In the world of fair, legitimate, and reasonable claims, you have to have a legitimate data loss tied to that peril. So if you're claiming hail or you're claiming wind, you better have a legitimate loss within the statute of limitations for that particular state. Most states are 2 years. Some states are 7 years, which is crazy to me. And some states are 1 year. But if you can't find a legitimate data loss that ties to that claim, you got major problems. And what that does is the insurance company has really 6 primary delay, deny, and reject tactics. You have improper installation, manufacturer's defects, past its useful, no functional damage. All those are, in my opinion, nonsense, because there's typically no language in the policy to support that. So that's Adam's job. Beat him up, Adam. They're not going to get us on that. What it can get you on is failure to report in a timely fashion and old damage. Old damage is the number one arrow in the quiver. And that's really the meat of my program. So when we bring on a client, we go and we inspect every single asset. Adam talked about documentation, photos, and written. We go look at it before it happens, because it's not if, but when. And now I've got a catalog of time, date, stamp photos and a written report by experts who understand the business, saying there is no hail, there is no wind, there is no improper. We document all that. Now we watch those properties in a proprietary weather tracking system, or if someone gives it a phone call. But normally we see it as quickly as they do. And then we go out and we reinspect. That could be 1 year later, could be 3 years later. And then we just compare the previous baseline to the current existing condition. If the damage is present, then I run it to Adam and say, Adam, this is what we think the data loss is. And then he comes back and says, yeah, that's formidable. We have a legitimate claim. It's $1 million. And I can go back to my client and say, hey, we got a legitimate storm. We've got pre and post and inspection data, and Adam's got a legitimate data loss. It's $1 million. Now an owner can go to their
Right.
policy and say, oh, we got a $20,000 deductible. I don't know about you, but I'm generally going to take that swing
Right.
without
Right.
a million. Right? But you could have wind damage and a legitimate loss, and we might come back and say it's just a little bit, and it's $25,000. Client may say this is not worth it. Every time a claim is filed, it does have an impact on your loss run. Doesn't mean your rates are going up because of that. But don't get me started on rates because they're going up anyways. I had somebody ask me the other day, they said, well, if we're going to file a claim, what's going to happen to my rates? They're going up at a clip of 17% right now with no claims.
That's
so,
insane. I have a question about that. Or I want to make a statement about that is that one beautiful thing that you do is you catch everything before it happens. So if you can go in there 2 years, year before to the policyholder and say, hey, we're going to inspect your property and you can help them out with all that, catch any errors before it happens. And then also you can review their policy and say, hey, you don't have adequate coverage for fire loss or for whatever it is. You want to go ahead and up this, or do you realize you have a $300,000 deductible? That's insane. Most people can't come out of pocket for that much money. You can catch all those surprises before, make sure that they're all beefed up. This is something that usually happens after the fact. Public adjusters usually get involved, let's say even 6 weeks after a storm happens, after somebody's already pissed off with their insurance company for not doing their part. And then they're coming in after the fact. And then the adjuster can go, I can't really help you out with your policy because you didn't really get a good policy, but I can help you out with this. So we can do a little bit.
Yeah.
You catch that way in advance and you
Well,
can correct all those problems.
You're spot on. In that last scenario you described, I call that unscrambling the egg.
Can't do it.
Or trying to eat a soup sandwich. And you're spot on. Can't do anything about the policy. But what Adam can do, and we get into it all the time. So a client comes on board with us and they give us 10 assets. And we go look at them. We call that a baseline. It's our first look. We're going to find some pre-existing damage. Okay. Some of them are going to be damaged. So we don't have the benefit of the baseline. But we still have this indemnification record because, like I said before, we don't enter any battle we can't win. It's frustrating for the property owner. It's frustrating for the broker or agent. It's frustrating for the carrier. It's frustrating for my team. It's frustrating for Adam's team. And here's a really important thing about all of this. Not only is it a colossal waste of time, it takes away from our brand. Adam and I are we're tight. We're teammates. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to air on public television segment on risk management end of this month. It's called Viewpoint. This is my plug. Viewpoint by Dennis Quaid. And it'll be on PBS and we'll blow it out on social media. It's a really good piece. It's about 7 minutes. Pretty cool. But coming back to it and what you were saying is I have bring us hot messes all the time. I've met guys I speak at forums and go to events, and I met guys who said, I'm in the middle of this mess. Doesn't mean it can't be unwound. Typically, when I get that scenario, I say, look, we need to inspect the policy, or we need to review the policy, we need to inspect the property, and we need to see any and all correspondence from the insurance company. And then my next statement is, I won't make you any promises. Because what we are more than anything is transparent and fantastic communicators. We're going to tell you the truth, whether it stings or not. Okay. But what we're not going to do is throw spaghetti on the wall. And you have too many people out there claim they are claims settlement specialists or GCs who get it. And if they're chasing the dollar, they'll put crap in and then you get crap out. And that's where the word storm chaser came from. There's a lot of connotations to that. What I've seen from the most common reasons for denial is they didn't report it in time or it's old damage. Now, one thing I didn't talk about, let's say we get a report and says, hey, there's damage. And I've had this happen. Property manager calls, oh, we got major wind damage. You got there's 3 shingles on the ground. Okay. But there was a storm date tied to that. Now that becomes our new baseline. We've ruled out that date. Because if you don't look at the property every time a storm allegedly comes through, you've lost your baseline. And then we've got a protocol in place where we go back every 3 years regardless.
So just to recap on that, just because, trying to understand that, let's say that you have a property owner and they file the insurance company's strategy to deny that claim is saying a year ago, there was a big storm came through, or maybe let's say 2 years ago, outside of the statutes of limitations. 2 years ago, there was a big storm came through, most likely did all that damage to your home or to your business. And so we're not going to cover that. That's the strategy that they use. And that's how you can prevent all that, is by every storm that's coming through, you go in through and do a reinspection of it. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. Here's the thing: there are like 7 critical elements to a formidable risk management program. The most property owner operators, management companies don't have those resources in house. There are certain things you can do, and we actually publish a list. First and foremost, review your policy. Guess what? You better get somebody, a licensed public adjuster, who knows their stuff. Your broker's not going to give you the full interpretation, nor is your carrier. So you got to go get that done. Next thing you got to do is you got to have eyes on that property to determine, and Adam will speak to this as well. He understands, and he said it before, insurance companies don't want to write $1 million checks, but they will if you can show them why. So that inspection's like when we find damage, a lot of times Adam's team will go out and collaborate on that. If our photos and everything are good enough, they'll just deal with it on site once the claim is filed and they've taken over the file, which means they deal with all the dealings with the adjuster and everything else. But these are elements that immediately you can't do you can do inspections, okay? I, as an owner, can have somebody go inspect the property. But if they don't have that intellectual acumen and expertise behind, what am I really looking for? Because when I go on property and there's damage, I'm looking for what they can argue, right? I'm not there to say, oh, that's a hail dent and that's shingle missing. I'm there to look at all the collateral. And it's actually, I'm going to segue with Adam on that. Adam?
Yeah, when on site, and Mark said it best, and I guess I said it best in our interview that we did on the PBS special. They don't want to write a check for $1 million. They don't want to write a check for $3 million. But we've seen them do it multiple times, but they will do it. They will when you document appropriately, when you put your, I like to say, ducks in a row, and it goes back again to documentation, the collateral damages. A lot of times the carrier will come back and say, well, the hail wasn't big enough to do damage, or it just knocked the granules off the shingles. It didn't bruise the mat. You've got to do a little bit of research. You go back and you get into some engineering guidelines, and you'll find out that granules on shingles are actually a protective surface of your asphalt mat. They're reflective in nature. They keep the UV rays from prematurely damaging your asphalt mat. So when they're removed, it is damage. And if there's a bruise or not, is now shortening the lifespan of that shingle. And so the more you know, the more that you're aware, the better you document, it seems to help them understand why they've got to write that check. And they most certainly will write it.
Got it. I want to segue into something. I want you guys both to tell me a claim that you guys worked together that was a particularly challenging one, something that was a real monster that you actually dealt with.
The one we're on now, or the one we did a couple months ago, Mark?
Which one?
Let's go with Auburn Lakes.
Sure.
Go for it. How'd you find that one?
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Started the claim process.
You talk about challenging claims and you're looking for something, that if we deal with a property claim where we've hit a home run and it's all been great and there were a few stumps and bumbles and a little bit of time delays, or then you want to hear about a super success story, then normally I'm going to point to what Adam mentioned, Woods at Auburn Lakes or Auburn Lakes condominiums. They were both home runs, but we had a baseline. So when you talk about a challenging claim, I'm going to talk about something in Texas. There's a property down there. I won't mention the name of it. Okay. There's a property down there in Dallas. And I met these folks. This is a great story. So I met these folks. I was speaking at a middle multifamily owners forum in Dallas, Texas in March of 2022. I did a whole risk management presentation. This guy comes up to me and he says, hey, I'm in a bit of a spot. And I said, okay, what's going on? He says, I got this property that's pretty damaged. The roofs are in really bad shape. The mansards are in bad shape. The gutters are in bad shape. We're getting leaks. We're getting ponding, and they're flat roof systems. And I'm thinking deferred maintenance, age, all this stuff that would make this claim impossible. But it's in Texas. Texas gets a lot of hail. So we went and we looked at it. The insurance company probably had 10 good reasons to say we're not paying this. They just deferred maintenance, 3 different types of flat roof surfaces that are incompatible, meshed together, blah, 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 blah. But Adam and his team were able to go in there and identify legitimate damages from a hailstorm that constituted them granting some coverage. All right. And some coverage came in the form of about $1.8 million.
Wow.
Once they've opened the door to the coverage, I actually don't like promoting this. Is just why I'm not saying the name of the client or the property, because I don't want anybody to have any erroneous expectations. However, once they've extended coverage, it opens Pandora's box to law and ordinance coverage, additional damage, decking, how much substrate and ISO is under that, and it just really opens it up. The guys hit a home run on this. The new owner client of mine is ecstatic. He's out singing everybody's song about us and our contractor, by the way, that we put on the project. And this thing probably has another $1.5 million worth of damages that will come out of that settlement. So was it challenging? Super challenging. One of the worst I've seen. And going into it, I'm the eternal optimist. Okay, my wife has to hit me with a frying pan every once in a while to calm me down. But in this particular instance, I knew what the team was capable of, and we forged ahead and got her done. Now, Adam, if you want to gloat a little bit about Woods at Auburn Lakes, tell them that story.
Let's go back to Texas real quick. Let's talk about that. The reason I want to talk about that is you talked about there being multiple roof surfaces meshed together. Everything that could be wrong or could be right for a carrier to deny was there. But again, it goes back to proper documentation and knowledge, expert knowledge, getting the right people on the project that understand what's owed and why. Ordinance and law. Mark said it when he mentioned O&L, that was the trigger on this property. You have damage to one surface. It's tied to one that by code is not allowed to be. And if you can go back and show that, then the next thing you're replacing the entire surface. And so after you get them to agree that now the whole surface has to be replaced, even the intertwined ones, you have to look at what's under it, what's on top of the substrate, how much ISO is on there, how tall are the curbs for the HVAC units. And if you have to start rebuilding curbs, now you have to redo the ISO insulation. Next thing you know, you're going all the way to deck with this thing. And you just have to know how to maneuver these things. On to the other one. I just wanted to piggyback Mark on that and why it was complex. But yeah.
Can I segue real quick on that? Here's the thing. I don't want people to get misled here. This is really important. Did a significant hailstorm fall on this property within a statute of limitations to file a claim? Absolutely. Was there fair, reasonable, and legitimate damage under the coverage terms of the policy? Absolutely, there was.
100%.
Okay. Are you entitled to ordinance and law upgrades to bring this building and roof system up to? So, yes, absolutely. There is nothing. We don't even get near the line. It's either above board or it's not above board.
That's right.
And so all the work that Adam done was fair, reasonable, and legitimate and supported by the contract.
And let's keep in mind, Mark, they wouldn't have stroked a check if it wasn't.
Yeah, right.
Not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart.
If they're right, they agree, right?
That's right. I'm gonna gloat on iStorm for a minute. I'm on the baseline reports and what that provides my team as public adjusters, umpires, appraisers, and experts. We had a file up in Ohio. We'll just call it Auburn. It consisted of 120 buildings, I think. Is that about right, Mark?
Yeah.
We went on site and we had a baseline from iStorm Group, and we were able to go from building to building with photo timestamp documentation showing what this building looked like prior to the date of loss. And we could actually get on roof to roof and see a damage. We're looking at a piece of damage on this roof, and we're looking at the same picture that didn't have damage before. We were able to not only resolve that claim in less than a 45-day period, but we resolved it at almost $3.8 million. And to gloat even more on ISG, iStorm was able to put a contractor on it that was able to knock out all those buildings in how many weeks, Mark?
He was 8 weeks for 100 roofs.
So we had over 4,500 squares of shingles installed in 8 weeks. My part and my team were done in 45 days. So you're looking at a four-month period from start to finish with the work being completed on over 4,500 squares on a multifamily property. And I will attribute that to the baseline reports that iStorm produces.
How long would that normally take? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark. How long would that normally take, roughly?
Without the report from Mark, I could see this going a year to potentially maybe a year and 3 or 4 months, just because of the fight we'd get for, oh, this was damaged before, or this was past damage, or all the complexities that the carrier could have thrown at us would have been thrown on something this size, but there was not an argument to be had.
That's funny because when we do a post-storm inspection, we've got a baseline showing no damage. Then we do a post-storm inspection. We leave the baseline information and photos in there, and then we show the post-storm information. And that's all in red. And we generally send that to the adjuster. And we tell the adjuster, I have one question for you. Do you want to write the estimate or do you want us to write it? Because we're not having an argument here. And Adam's being a little lenient on his settlement process. It was $3.8 million in 34 days. He settled
that's even faster.
So, you know, this, if you have a baseline, this stuff that could take 12 rounds, we knock it out in the first round or the second round. And it's important, another segue. My owner clients want to get back to pre-loss operating condition as soon as possible. One, they're entitled to it. And two, the aesthetics of a property are important in multifamily. If I'm out looking for apartments and I roll in and there's crappy looking roofs, what are my expectations of what's inside the unit? The other thing that Adam and Ice Storm were able to do on this was that property he's talking about was a condo association. They had reserves in excess of $2 million to replace all those roofs over about a 4-year period. We put those reserves back in their account, back in the owner. So all these HOA fees that were being paid by the individual owners, and now those dollars are able to be repurposed somewhere else. There's actually a video out on this particular loss, and the ending of this, I told you before, Caleb, when we talked, I said, I spend and Adam collaborates on some, we spend big money for professional production because a crappy video is worse than no video. But this guy closes, he's the treasurer at that HOA board, and he closes with, I would rank them 11 out of 10.
That's nice.
They trust you with your grandchildren.
Wow.
And that's what this game is all about, trust and longevity. I've been asked multiple times, how in the hell do you go baseline 2,000 properties, not knowing if you're going to make money, and then you have to expend all the time, money, and resources?
Because it's not if,
but when.
There's a segue right there, not if, but when. Like I said before, we know statistically, after 11 years, we know statistically how many of our existing properties will get affected, what percentage that is. And we also know when we bring on new clients, what percentage have pre-existing damage. That's what makes my model sustainable, because something we didn't talk about was I don't charge my clients any fees, none.
That's impressive.
Everything we do is on contingency. Now, when Adam's team settles the loss and we think it's fair, reasonable, and legit, we take that back to the client. The clients give in all of this. Their commitment is that A, we get to settle it, which they want us to, and why wouldn't you? And then the second thing is I get to bring in an iStorm certified general contractor. So we find the best of the best in a market. We vet the hell out of them. And then if we let them in, they get to execute the projects for the insurance rates and figures in the estimate, plus the owner's deductible, which is by law. And then I collect my fee from the contractor. So it's a beautiful thing, right? And then, so we'll come out with 2 or 3 projects on each pass of a 15 asset portfolio. And that's enough to fund all the effort. So it's a beautiful thing. The other place we're getting a lot of traction and the owner operators are just thrilled is in the due diligence world. So they get an offering memorandum on a property they're interested in. They strike an initial deal on the purchase price. They typically have about 60 days to figure out, are there any defects? Kind of like when you're buying a home, right? You call the whole house. But the whole house inspector is a jack of all trades, master of none. If you bring us in, what we're looking to make sure doesn't happen, and we'll comment on the foundation. Hey, it's sagging. You got metal windows and the seals are bad and blah, blah, blah. It has nothing to do with storm damage. What I'm trying to rule out is wind and hail. Because if you purchase a property that has wind and hail, what do you think is going to go on, right? Insurance company is going to have that arrow in their quiver of old damage from the get-go.
And you didn't have the policy then, so you're screwed.
Basically, it's on you. When we do find that, though, we go back to the buyer, my client,
right?
And they can approach the seller and say, "Hey, look, man, I got $700,000 worth of hail damage to roofing and siding. What are we going to do about it?" Last thing the buyer wants to do is give up on the agreed upon purchase price. I've seen them try to negotiate that. Most of the time, they can just go to claim on their own policy and then do an assignment of benefits to my client, the buyer, at the closing table.
as an
It
addendum.
wins. They keep their purchase price. My client gets all new roofing or siding or whatever we tell them is damaged. I remember the first time we did that, and the client had been a client for about 4 years. He's about an 8-year client now. And he says, Mark, he goes, if they decide to file a claim and do an assignment of benefits at the closing table, you better close this damn thing.
Better do it.
Uh,
But let me ask you a question about that, Mark and Adam. Have you guys ever had a problem or difficulty with the adjusters after you already had this initial report? Or is it pretty much smooth sailing from there? What's your experience from that side?
My experience is we don't always have a report. Mark said that. We don't always have
Hmm.
one that if he gets a new client, we go out first time to do a baseline and we find damage immediately. Sometimes there's not a report. Mark picks up a lot of new clients where we don't have that. Now, the ones where we do have the report, there's not a lot of pushback. Really, what are you going to say or do? We have one of the attorneys write a letter and explain, hey, here's the date of loss, here's the damages, here's a report showing what it looked like a year ago. There's not a lot they can say. But there are a handful, maybe 50-50, where we don't have a report. And definitely get pushback when we don't have the report than when we do. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say real quick, and I don't mean to go backwards, but Mark was talking about value for the client and how Auburn was able to put money back into their coffers through this insurance process. One thing I like to tell these owners, a lot of PAs are working with management companies. They're having to go through all these chains of command. Mark's clients are the owners. We don't talk to property management companies. Matter of fact, we blow right past them because we're working right with the owner. And one of the favorite things, and I think Mark will agree that I like to push the owner, is you have an asset. This is their moneymaker. This is an asset to them, and it's there for them to produce an income for themselves. It's part of their business model. And what a better way to increase the value of your property, to increase the value of your asset by using somebody else's dollars in a legitimate manner. And that goes back to Auburn. Here they had the $2 million that they had that they could spend, and were able to produce an increased value of their asset by using insurance dollars, again, legitimately, instead of them using their own dollars to do it. Anytime that Mark is speaking to an owner or a potential new client, and they realize what I just said, we're going to increase the value of your property using somebody else's money, it's a no-brainer.
Right. Yeah.
I wanted to segue on that. And I started talking to you a little bit earlier about the elements to a formidable risk management program. And then you asked the question about, do we get pushback when we have a baseline? I told you the 6 primary reasons carriers will deny claims. So they can always argue damage, improper installation. Sometimes they'll argue the damn data loss when I've got a baseline showing that it wasn't there. And now I got another. They can always argue these items. So the other things that are critical elements in a formidable risk management program are you have to have on your team forensic weather specialists, because they challenge Doppler, radar, et cetera, and they can come back and say, all right, if somebody says 0.75 inch hail won't do damage, they can come back and say, not only was it the size of a marble, it was wind driven at 70 miles per hour and the density was that of a marble. That's doing damage. Okay. So you have to have that expert resource. You also need engineers, right? They could send an engineer out and come up with all kinds of nonsense, but I don't mind engineers because typically they'll write a report. It's written off a template. And generally speaking, I've always said if you give people enough rope, they will hang themselves. Something in writing that gives us the ammunition we need to challenge it and say this is totally wrong.
Absolutely.
Then you have to be able to have appraisers. Adam's an appraiser. He's licensed to umpire, and he's got a team of those people across the country. And these are guys that are going to be fair, reasonable, legitimate, and they're going to be honest. Okay. But if it gets to a point where but they're also going to be customer centric, owner centric, right? You say, hey, this damage is legit. This is what you owe for. And then, as Adam mentioned earlier, if you get to a certain point, they might need a legal nudge. And it's important to have specialists in that arena as well, because so that with all these elements, I've yet to find property management company and owner equity group that has all this in place. Now, with that being said, I will tell you, if you're in Denver, Colorado, you better have some of that stuff in place. You talk about your rate increases.
Yeah.
These guys, the baseline in Denver, Colorado is the last time they built it, which is typically about 3 years ago. So no
Right.
baseline required. Okay. We just put brand new shit on this 3 years ago. That's how frequently they get hit. And
That's
that
right.
stuff out there is like this.
Yeah.
We really need to be building those roofs out of concrete and gypsum.
That's right.
But it's just interesting how the fluctuation in the market. And then I want to talk a little bit about rates and rate increases. I mentioned it earlier. They're going up anyways. Okay. But there's a misconception out there in the industry that says, oh, gee, if I file a claim, my rates are going to go up. And from that hurricane in Florida that came in, and I live in southern Georgia, I'll say, newsflash, your rates are going up anyways.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with Florida or Ian.
Yeah,
Or
reason,
whatever.
sure, it has to do with a big storm. So reasonably in a marketplace, think about this, right? Big storm comes through. I'm not getting all that back from one person. I've got to spread that increase across the entire insurance base. So if you're not participating in a fair, reasonable, and legitimate loss because you think your rates are going up, it's a terrible mistake. And
Let me interject there, Mark. Let's go back to the rate increase thing. First of all, it's an act of God, and therefore you are not going to be penalized for an act of God. However, based on your risk area, the area you're in, the risk that's there, if my house right here got hit right now and the other houses in my neighborhood got hit and I don't file a claim, I'm still in that risk area. And therefore my insurance is going up like my neighbors are. And that's the time it does. Now, if you have a hailstorm and it's not a big hailstorm and you file a claim, it is an act of God. It doesn't mean you're going up. But in a big situation like a Hurricane Ian or something, you're in a large risk area, it will go up. You'll also run into, talk about rate increase, you'll run into a lot of agents that will say they will detour their clients from filing a claim. Part of their concern is that they're gonna lose bonuses and that their loss ratio is going to go upside down. And even a lot of agents don't understand that it's not going to affect their loss ratio or their bonus potential because it was an act of God. There was nothing anybody could have done to prevent that from happening. It's not like I had a can of gasoline sitting under under a receptacle that sparked. That's a totally different ballgame. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that it's about your risk area. It's about the area that you're in and the risk that the carrier associates to that area.
Mark, you're saying that these rates are going up all over the country. We're not talking about Florida. We're talking about Colorado, California, all over the country. You're seeing rates increasing. You said 17%. That's insane.
It's higher than that also. Your standard increases. Some of it has to do with, and then one thing we haven't talked about, pardon me, I haven't talked about acts of God. People are cooking bacon at 2 a.m. and falling asleep. Okay. They're getting tired.
I don't know why they're still up cooking bacon.
Because they were smoking weed.
There you go. That wouldn't be
Tell me
negligence.
like it is, okay? We literally went through a fire and everybody's looking for a cause of loss. And I found a half-smoked joint sitting on the table. And I went, there's your problem. Okay? And that's why I started at 2 a.m. Let's try a damn pizza in the oven or bacon on the grill. I mean, I'm being real, okay?
Wow.
And I thought that whole fire thing was going to go through the roof, no pun intended, back when COVID hit and everybody was at home. It was the direct opposite.
Yep.
Because they didn't want to burn the house down. It was just really weird. So we didn't see a real impact on that. Going to drive a car through a building. Whoops.
It's happened.
Oh, happens all the time. A tree's going to fall and cut your building in half. We're working on one in Macon, Georgia right now. All kinds of structure. So these things happen. And here's what I caution my clients. Right? I talked about, hey, look, you've got some damage. There's some things that make this claim a little difficult if I don't have the baseline, right? And it's only this amount of money. And even though your roofs are hail damage, you could still get another good 5 to 6 years out of them. Okay. Those are soft considerations, but can be hard considerations. And let me tell you why. Let's say I've got a portfolio, and I do, and I'm thinking of a specific client, and they got 30 assets across 4 states. And everything's locked on one policy with one giant deductible. If I throw that claim into my loss run, and all of a sudden some monster storm comes through, right? Or I get 2 fires in a 12-month period, I got major problems because I never know. I never know when somebody's going to fall asleep at the wheel and drive into my building. I never know when somebody's going to burn weed and cook bacon and burn my place down. I never know when God's going to decide to give us hail, which I like, or I never know. So I have to be prepared that I don't go after a frivolous loss or a loss that we can absorb. These companies are well heeled. Caleb, you mentioned, most people only have 300,000. If you don't have $300,000 in reserves to cover your co-insurance, you're probably in the wrong business, or you're not running your business properly. They
Right.
do have it. They don't want to spend it. It just sucks. It's a lot of money. So in regards to the whole game of when do you file, we're always just going to give you the factual information and say, look, most people don't give a hoot about your loss run. If they're in storm damage restoration, they'll throw spaghetti on the wall, and the if come that they get an adjuster who's getting ready to quit because he's unhappy, that's going to buy everything just to make a match. And that's a real thing. The attitude of the adjuster can be a real thing. But I think all this started on pushback. There are elements of pushback regardless. All it does for us, and Adam mostly, is say, we are going to get what we deserve. So how far do you want to go? Because I've got forensic weather specialists. I've got a baseline inspection. I've got firm data loss. I've got regular engineers, forensic engineers that can, if you want to open the can of worms, right? Give you a perfect example. Got a loss going on right now. Big flat roof system, 15-ton AC units, about 20 of them. They got beat to hell in a hailstorm. It's a rubber roof, okay? Initially, I just went to claim. And said, let's just get, all I wanted was their AC units. You got all this pushback. As soon as I got the pushback, I said, okay, you mess with the bull, you're getting the horns. So now instead of them to think $500,000 or $600,000 in new AC units, guess what? All that stuff Adam talked about, curb height, code, law and ordinance, or ordinance and law. Now that all that's done, they're pushing what, 3 mil? They're not going to be happy when it ends. And we've got an appraiser on there that's nine kind of guy, and he will prevail. It just takes time. When you get into these layers of argument, it just takes more time. And so one thing I've learned in 11 years is be patient. You got to be patient. I know we want our building to look better, and I know I got a resident complaining, but when there's millions of dollars on the line that fairly and legitimately should be taken care of by the carrier,
Be patient.
be patient.
Yeah.
Get into the ring and don't stop until that final bell rings and the umpire says you win. You're the champion.
Let me ask you, both of you. I'll start with you, Mark. Where do you want to go from this? What's your future aspirations? Do you want to have, let's say, 1 million properties, total units covered? You want to have in all 50 states? Where do you move from this? Where do you move from the future?
That's a good question. I'm going to keep it brief. We are just going to, in our 2023 strategy, but people get hung up on numbers and all this kind of stuff. And numbers are important. Okay. It's very important. You got to cover your overhead. You got to be able to expand. You got to be able to service your client more than anything. I think for us, our vision, mission, and really a value statement is that we want to just continue to be curious and of service to our clients, right? How can we improve? Because I don't care about what I did yesterday. They're great accolades and it's all wonderful. But my team needs to be curious and of service to the client. And I am fortunate I have young guys who are learning. And they just bring a different element. I'm an old dude, man. I'm not like an old dog. I can't learn a new trick, but these guys just think differently. And it's awesome when I get people out of the box who don't have some sort of formed societal plan about how things should be done. So we're going to just continue to streamline what we do. Wise, we'll probably go from 2,000 assets. On the aggressive side, we'll probably put another, I think we're geared for 1,000 or 1,200. For me, it's never been about chasing the money. It's always been about exceed expectations and results will follow. I'm confident that if we do what we do best, my existing clients are going to tell owners, are going to tell other owners. They're going to bring to the table. As my brand and my expertise continues to be, we grew very largely in social media last year. I spoke at different conferences and forums. Like I mentioned, we're going to be on this on risk management, by the way, which is awesome. My goals are, just like I said, is get everybody on the same page, which is, and Adam's probably said it 5 times already. Not if, but when. Really, what I would say to my potential clients is, you are at risk and we can help. And that's it. Let's have a 20 or 30-minute Zoom call. We'll do some vetting of you and vice versa. And I think at the end of the day, you can go out and talk to some of our clients, hear some of our stories, and have a pretty good time doing it, because I'm not even telling you the good stories. These are just the ones that go on. So that's all I got.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, Adam. So tell me about yourself and where you want to see yourself in down the road?
Well, first and foremost, I really liked what Mark just said. Stay curious. We have to. And the reason we have to is because there is a huge curve and we have to stay at the forefront of that curve. There are people catching up, catching on every single day, and we've got to stay ahead of them. So while they might be on a path like this, I think we're going like this. we've got to stay, we've got to stay ahead of that curve. And curiosity is what will keep you there. There are new laws forming every day. Look at Florida and some of the stuff that just got passed down there. There are new intricacies to policies that are being inclusively included every day. These cosmetic exclusions and these different ways that the carrier can beat out the policyholder by not paying. You've got to know these things, and you've got to, even more importantly, you've got to keep finding more experts that are younger, that are growing up, that, like Mark said, don't have a preconceived notion of how things are supposed to be. You've got to be curious. You've got to stay ahead of that curve. And I've got to keep finding those people and bringing them into my program so that we can keep doing what it is that we're doing. In 10 years, where do I see this? Man, sky's the limit. What Mark is doing right now, what I'm doing right now is something that when I first got involved in this line of work many years ago, I knew that something like this could be real. I just didn't know how to do it. And I think everybody that's in this industry thinks, man, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this or that or be on the forefront? We all have that idea, but we're doing it. And we're going to stay ahead of the curve, and you're not going to catch us.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Excellent. Mark and Adam, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed talking with you guys. I think I learned a lot. I'm very impressed with your business models and the both of you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let's do it again.
Okay, will do. Thanks, Mark.
Take care, guys.
Too.
Bye, Adam.
Bye, Mark. See you guys.